Hey everybody, Randy Wong here again. Today I'm going to share a story about Dan Inosanto. For those of you who have never had the pleasure of meeting him, he is the kindest, most unassuming, most unselfish man you will ever meet in your life. I had the pleasure of knowing him and working with him those years that I was with Norman at the museum. And after the museum hours, I would, venture down to his studio, his school in Torrance, where he taught with Richard Bustillo, who was also assisting him. He shared a story with me one time, which I'm going to share with you today. It's a great story. One day, Dan and Richard were traveling. They were traveling out of state in an area that neither one knew very well. And it was getting late in the day, and they hadn't eaten, so Dan says to Richard, "Hey, let's grab some food. How does Chinese sound?" And Richard says, "Sure, let's get something to eat." So they found a Chinese restaurant, and even though it was close to closing time, they walked in, the waiters were kind enough to seat them and serve them. Dan and Richard they placed their order with the head waiter. The head waiter goes back to the kitchen, comes back out, and Dan and Richard just relax, having tea and just taking in some light conversation, until Dan starts to notice something strange. He started to feel people staring at him. In fact, when he turned around just slightly, he noticed that all the waiters were staring at him and their table. In fact, they were giving Dan some really hard looks, which was concerning. So Dan thought to himself, as probably just my imagination. A minute later, all the waiters start marching back into the kitchen. So Dan goes, "Hey, I think our food's ready and I think we're finally going to get served." So they're waiting and waiting. Finally, the waiters come back out. But this time, when they come out, they're marching single file. And they all have their hands behind their back. So Dan said to Richard, "Something's going down." The waiters came out, all hands behind their back. They started walking towards Dan and Richard's table. And they started positioning themselves around the table as if they were surrounding Dan and Richard. Dan looks at Richard and gives him the look like, "Hey, something's gonna happen." The head waiter was right behind Dan. And Dan was getting these really weird vibes, so in his mind, his thoughts are racing. He's thinking, okay, we're gonna get jumped. Who am I gonna take out first? And where's the exit doors? Which way to go when we make our move? So as these thoughts are racing in Dan's mind, because the waiters all had their hands behind their back. They came out of the kitchen, and in the kitchen, guess what? There's knives and cleavers, so your imagination takes over, and you start thinking the worst. Anyway, as Dan was sitting there, he started slowly turning towards the head waiter to see if he could pick up any movement. As he did so, the head waiter jumps forward with both hands outstretched, and he yells to Dan, Mr. Inosanto, can we please have your autograph?" And in the waiter's hands were a piece of paper and a pen. And as Dan turned and looked at the rest of the waiters that were around the table, each one had their hands outstretched with pen and paper. So, oh my God, it must have been a hilarious scene. I'm sure Dan was just laughing. But the rest of that evening, Dan spent signing autographs, and of course they had a great meal. But when Dan told me that story the first time, I just started busting up. So I wanted to share that with you, and I have many more moments with Dan that I treasure. And as we go along, I'll be sharing some more videos of my time and my memories with Dan Inosanto. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. We'll see you again. Thank you.